You have tuned into Irish Illustrated Insider with John Bryce from Football Scoop. I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated, and this is Irish Illustrated Insider. It is Thursday, January 30th. We are still talking assistant coaches, potential hirings. Chris Ash appears to be that much closer to being officially announced by Notre Dame. Joe Rudolph, Notre Dame's offensive line coach, reportedly has interviewed with the Chicago Bears. James Blanchard is a name from Texas Tech that has been floated as a potential general manager for Notre Dame, and Zaire Turner, Notre Dame's former director of player personnel, former now because she's joining Chad Bowden at USC, as is Dre Brown, former Notre Dame recruiting guy back in the day. When was that? Last year or the year before? So we got a bunch of personnel questions in segment two, but right now let's address Chris Ash. How much closer are we to this becoming reality, JB?
It's doing the on Chris Ash. I think Chris Ash is at the finish line. Notre Dame officials, especially Marcus Freeman, have been in Mobile this week at the Senior Bowl. But my understanding is that basically the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and Chris Ash will be officially announced as Notre Dame's defensive coordinator sooner rather than later.
The Ohio State guys I talked to love him. They all obviously also won a national title with him and beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, so they probably have fond memories of his 2-year tenure there. Obviously, Wisconsin, he was successful. Same thing I said last time, though. He's 10 years removed from success. But as you pointed out, Priester, in your Thursday thoughts, the Rutgers thing, there's so many different threads to the Rutgers thing. Not being a good head coach has nothing to do with being hired to be a defensive
Very
coordinator.
true.
That's my
Very
number
true.
one thing, because there's a bunch of them that wouldn't be good head coaches in the world, I think. And the lack of, Mike Mickens is an amazing coach. Mike Mickens probably couldn't do that with the Rutgers corners he had back in 2016 through 2018 either, because you can't say, all right, we're going to be a heavy man team. Let's go. Here's the technique I need to teach you. If you're not Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Benjamin Morrison, and to a lesser extent, guys like Mickey. So I always, coordinator and coaching hires, I feel like for the general fan are so far afield from their depth of knowledge that maybe more than recruiting a player. And I can include us too. I don't mean JB who has sources in the industry, but like I can't look at Chris Ash and tell you how he'll be at Notre Dame. Like that is beyond my scope of understanding football when I have not interviewed a single person other than two writers that talk about him. Some coaches say he's great. Some coaches have a problem with him. The winning coaches say he's great. The losing coaches have a problem with him. This is the way it always works. So when people are like, terrible hire, incredible hire, what? I mean, you don't know. And I'm not saying you. I'm saying I don't know either. I can't say Chris Ash because he was a hard ass somewhere else is going to be a hard ass. Maybe he needed to be a hard ass. Maybe those players liked having a hard ass coach at the time. Maybe it worked better. Maybe they're out drinking all night and he needed to be a hard ass. I mean, there's so many threads to being an assistant coach and coordinator. I hate speaking on someone's personality. I like the 4-3 aggressive scheme. Just haven't seen it in many years.
Yeah, I would just follow up and say that the overall feedback I've gotten from his peers as well as people in Columbus has been more positive than negative for sure. Can he be a little brusque? Who among us cannot? And certainly who among defensive coordinators or offensive line coaches, those are the ones that I think through the years have been the most brusque in relative dealings. So he's got a good reputation. He plays a very aggressive, or in the past, he has played and leaned into a very aggressive style of defensive football. Though the one question I've heard from more people than not is that while he has called plays, he doesn't have just the deepest history of calling plays. And even when they won that national title at Ohio State, his co-coordinator was Luke Fickell. And
Yeah.
so I thought that was important because it was specifically pointed out to me, and it was specifically indicated that Ash absolutely did a lot of good things. he also was working the co-chair with Luke Fickell, and we know Luke Fickell's reputation as a DC and as a head coach.
Tim, do you remember when we were covering Notre Dame in 15? Like I knew Chris Ash, but like I always considered Fickell the defensive coordinator there, to be totally
Yeah,
honest with you. Not
yeah,
whether I'm right or wrong. And it sounds like it might be more wrong than right because talking to a couple guys at the Ohio State beat, I mean they credited him for a lot of stuff. When he also and this has long been the case now in college football, but he brought the rugby style of tackling to Ohio
yes,
State. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's an
And
interesting. Obviously people do that
well,
now.
he was probably credited the same way Mike Mickens is credited by Notre Dame fans right now. And so, did he call the plays? Maybe not, but he made sure the back end was in order, the same way that Al Golden could count on Mike Mickens
Right.
to do the same thing as well. I've written about this and talked about it enough. My only point is there's a delicate balance. And I'm not saying hard ass is wrong. I'm just saying you got to understand he's never coached Notre Dame football student athletes, especially ones that are coming out of the Al Golden, Marcus Freeman culture.
I would have really discounted you saying that if you hadn't said it about Brian Van Gorder too. And I'm not comparing their coaching styles, but you said that we talked about Van Gorder is a very smart defensive mind. Like it passed the game. His style was passed by the spread 20 years ago, but he's a very smart defensive mind. And you mentioned that about Van Gorder. He pretty quickly, like, I don't think he relates to the Notre Dame student
No.
athlete. And you were
And it
right.
got
You were
worse.
spot on. Yeah.
It was
But
worse than I realized.
you had met him though at that point. That would be the only difference. I would
Yeah,
say.
and it reminds me of God rest his soul, my high school basketball coach, who was also my trigonometry teacher, a brilliant man, absolutely mathematically brilliant, who could not relate to high school basketball players and high school trigonometry, classmates. And that was BVG. I mean, now, there were players that really liked playing for him, but it was those that picked up his defense.
Yeah, yeah. Joe Schmidt,
Joe Schmidt,
Jalen
yeah, Joe
Smith are really
Schmidt,
good at it.
yeah, they had no problem with him. I don't think, for the most part, like there's a perception that John Tenuta, that the players didn't like him. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. The certain members of the media didn't, but I'm not.
I think they just lost under him, so a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. So look, enough about that. I mean, it's going to be Chris Ash. The other question is, will it be Mike Mickens as a co-defensive coordinator? And unless you guys have heard something different since I last spoke with you, it appears that he will be. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Mickens is preparing to stay. And as I've continued to say, I'd be surprised if he was not in a co-coordinator role.
And that'll be, now the next time Notre Dame's lead coordinator goes to the NFL, which will probably happen with Chris Ash if he has the kind of success that Al Golden did. Then the next time it has to be Mike Mickens, and he will have served as a co-coordinator. I mean, provided that Marcus Freeman is assured that he is ready. These comparisons, though, to, well, Freeman wasn't ready as a head coach and he got the job, so he should give the coordinator's role to Mike Mickens. It's not. You can't just. Every situation is different. You just can't. Marcus Freeman was clearly trending toward becoming a head coach, and if it wasn't at Notre Dame, he'd be a head coach somewhere else right now, and probably would have been starting in 2022. So I don't.
He would have been.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
would have
Right.
been.
So those exact comparisons, like, well, he did it, so it'll work. It doesn't work that way. That you just can't make a blanket statement and say that it applies to everybody.
I agree with you, but I think fans make more of the blanket statement because Marcus said 3 weeks ago now these guys took a chance on a inexperienced coach to become the head coach of Notre Dame. So when he said that 3 weeks ago, the logical step for fans to take, I think, and I agree, it's a logical step. Why isn't he taking that step for Mike Mickens? I don't find that crazy from a outsider's point of view.
Because
Right.
Marcus Freeman convinced Jack Swarbrick in a multitude of ways that none of us have exposure to, that he was the guy for the job. It's
Right. No, I know. I'm saying Marcus said that. I'm not saying that it's apples to apples. Marcus said someone took a chance on me. So it's a logical thing for fans to say, Marcus said someone took a chance on me. Why not take a chance on someone? It's you're just kind of connecting dots there that don't necessarily connect.
Right, especially when Marcus had on multiple occasions, including also earlier this month or the last day of 2024 in New Orleans extolled the virtues of Mike Mickens as an absolute defensive coordinator. So I think that's what
fans are grabbing on
all of those. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He just didn't say my solo defensive coordinator. He did not say that. But and apparently there was something to that. But be that as it may, it appears that the team is about to be put in place. As I'm told, and I'm going to say there's good news and bad news here. The good news is that the spring schedule has been set. The bad news is I can't tell you what it is, but you're going to find out. That's terrible of me to do, but I just want to go ahead and tease that because I think in fairly short order you're going to hear from Notre Dame what the schedule is, timing of the Blue Gold game. But that
I got really bad news on the spring schedule today. That's really bad.
Deion Colzie is going to Miami, Ohio. I did something that I rarely do, but the situation before the national championship when we had the media day with all the players, we had access to everybody, and I happened to be walking by Deion Colzie, and I stopped him, and I really don't know whether Deion Colzie knows who the hell I am or not. It doesn't really matter. There's no reason why he should. But I just stopped him and I said, you know what? I want to tell you something that a lot of guys in your situation would have copped a bad attitude or would have left, but instead you had an opportunity at a role to be a blocker. I didn't go into this great detail, but I'm just giving you a little background. You had an opportunity to serve, to play a role on this very, very good Notre Dame football team as a blocker. He threw one of the two key blocks on the big run by Jaden Thomas at the inside the red zone against Penn State. And I just said, I admire that. Congratulations. And he didn't respond to it too much, but I just felt like it was necessary to say that because in an age where a lot of players are quick to abandon their team when things aren't going well for them. And that's why admiration for Pat Coogan, the way he handled his responsibility, and all the best to him wherever he decides to go. But Deion Colzie will end up at Miami of Ohio, which is a much better spot for him to actually play a significant role in the passing game.
He always had a very high level of self-awareness during our conversations and interviews when he had to work on things and what he talked about receiver coaches telling him what to do. And ironically, it was to be more physical with his hands, and he got on the field because he got more physical as a blocker, not as a receiver.
Yeah, that's a good call, Tim. That's a good call. Last thing I want to, unless you guys want to jump in after this, but there have been some questions about the roster that Notre Dame put out. Kevin Bauman is one of the guys on that roster. I didn't go through each one. But I know a couple people have asked about Kevin Bauman, the possibility of him returning. That would be for a sixth year. Is that correct? Okay.
Right. He would probably have another year, honestly, to waiver anywhere he wants to play because he missed multiple years.
Yeah.
COVID and multiple injury years. Like nowadays, now he'll get it. Nowadays, I get it.
So he's a guy that, I mean, every now and then you hear about a guy that's in his seventh year. He would fit in that.
I've listed him as having 1 year of eligibility for like the last 2 years, and people always say he has more. I'm like, I'm just going to leave it that way, and then we'll figure out the years he gets.
So we expect him back. Now, Jason Onye, and people are always asking about him because he was an effective player. When he was on the field for Notre Dame, they needed him in the second half of the season when the depth at defensive tackle was dwindling. And he is still listed on the roster, but I'm told that that's not etched in stone. But there remains, contrary to what we haven't said this in a while, but there appears to be that there could be a path to him returning to the team in the spring. Don't ask again because we're probably not going to have an answer between now and the spring, but his name is still on the roster, and that is still a possibility. I doubt that we're going to get any further information on that until spring practice opens on. You'll find that out next week. Hey, are you guys looking for upgrade to your wardrobe? Founded by Notre Dame alum Ga Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We will be back for segment 2, Burning Up the Boards.
Welcome back to segment 2, Burning Up the Boards. Our first question is from ND Wet Sprocket. Can you tell us more about James Blanchard? It seems he falls into the evaluation category of a GM you guys had discussed on Monday's podcast.
Yeah. For those that haven't heard about James Blanchard, he is a general manager at Texas Tech, perhaps not for much longer. Notre Dame definitely is interested in him. Irish Illustrated put out some commentary on that yesterday, and we got a little bit of pushback on the finality of it. And so, it's not final, but it looks like it's trending that way. And I'm going to throw it to JB here in a second, but I just want to comment on, yeah, and to the question that Tim just asked there. Um, I think whereas there was some commentary on Chad Bowden and what his role was, it was less, from my perspective, it was less talent evaluation and more director of recruiting. And he talked about, John, I think you talked the other day about his relationship with Christian Gray and how he reached out to Christian Gray when he was visiting and going through a bit of a tough time. I mean, he was the ultimate facilitator, Chad Bowden was. I think James Blanchard is more of a film talent evaluator and a guy maybe in a better position to, and we talked extensively about this being one position or two. We talked about the need for it to be two, but I think Blanchard is a guy that is a little bit better equipped to handle both aspects of it. Still not sure exactly how Notre Dame is going to handle that position or both positions. John, take it from there, please.
Yeah, I would. Bowden wore many hats, and I talked to multiple people on campus over the course of this week, including a number of conversations yesterday. And, people were shocked that Chad left. I should make that very clear. And one person in the program yesterday told me point blank, he was the ultimate team player. Yes, he at times rubbed some people the wrong way, but ultimately, whatever he did, he believed he was doing for Notre Dame to make our team better. And look at the roster that he helped us put out to play for a national championship. I think sometimes Bowden's scouting or talent eval abilities are overlooked a little bit because he's more associated with having Dante Moore sit on a gold throne or dancing at the airport with a boombox greeting recruits or being the engineer of some of these more visible things that Notre Dame has begun to do in recent years in recruiting under Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden. But he started as a student breaking down film at Cincinnati, and that's when he got really close with Marcus Freeman, was breaking down film for Marcus Freeman and helping identify prospects. So I do think that's a skill of Bowden. It's very much absolutely a skill of James Blanchard, maybe to a little bit better depth. I talked to a sitting GM yesterday who is a power conference sitting GM who has great interest in the Notre Dame job. And we were discussing Blanchard, and this quote's in our story on Football Scoop. And he was like, that guy is a hell of a recruiter. He recruits his ass off. He's good at evaluation, all of those things. So he's got the respect of his peers. He's got a pretty sizable personality when you talk to people in Texas. He's not an invisible guy. So he does the eval. He does a lot of the scouting or the identifying and then meets with the coaches on it. But then he's also, again, got the relationships, and he's got relationships all over Texas. And Joy McGuire is someone I've gotten to know through the years. He thinks incredibly highly of James Blanchard and has routinely prioritized keeping him, because let's remember, Notre Dame tried incredibly hard to hire James Blanchard 2 years ago before it settled on Butler Benton, and Butler Benton didn't even last a year in South Bend before he was gone last winter. So this is hardly Notre Dame's first run at James Blanchard. Some people at Texas Tech would tell you it's Notre Dame's third run at James Blanchard, and Texas Tech would tell you they will do everything in their power to keep James Blanchard.
And John, your reference to Joey McGuire, for not everybody that knows, he is the head coach at Texas Tech. He just finished his third year, I believe, at Texas Tech.
Did he really finish his third year, not his second year?
So,
That's
right?
incredible.
I think, are we sure it's his third and not his fourth? It's at least his
Did
third.
he come in before Marcus Freeman? Have I lost that much time in my memory? That's incredible.
I'm pretty sure. Well, I can double check here, but
He's 3 or 4. It makes me wrong no matter what. I would have thought
yeah.
2.
Well, I'm not sure that
Yeah,
people.
no, he has completed his third year because he's coached 39 games at Texas Tech.
Hey, veering off, did we talk about Joe Rudolph in the first segment? I know we did before we recorded. Did we talk about him in the? in the first segment? He
I
We're
don't
talking
know
about him
that
right
he
now.
is.
This
Yeah.
question
Yeah,
is
no,
this
okay.
question is from Golden Domer Wet Sprocket about Joe Rudolph. Could you guys talk about Joe Rudolph, please? There we go.
Um, you guys know there's a report out there that he interviewed with the Bears. This would mark the third or fourth consecutive, I guess, yeah, 23, 24. This would mark the third consecutive offseason under Marcus Freeman that members of his staff have interviewed with the NFL. You guys know my stance on this. You better have people that want to talk to your coaches, or you don't have the right people and you're not going to always be the right person. I don't have anybody indicating to me that Joe Rudolph is at the top of the Bears list. I could be wrong on that. Maybe the people I've talked to on campus this week are wrong about that. There was no sense of similarity with reports bubbling up about Joe Rudolph talking with the Bears as there was the immediate, oh man, this was inevitable when the Bengals position opened and everybody in the world knew that Al Golden would be the top target. So I don't want to wholly dismiss or diminish it. I just want to stress that everyone I've talked to had completely disparate reaction to the reaction when the Bengals fired Lou and Arumo.
You know, we've had a lot of questions about was there discord in the Notre Dame in the offensive line room. Look, when you have veteran players that get beat out by younger guys, a narrative is going to begin. There appears to be other sites that are a lot more tuned into this or think that they are a lot more tuned into this. I found Joe Rudolph to be an excellent teacher from the amount of time, the little bit amount of time that I saw him on the field. That's a blip on the time that Joe Rudolph has spent coaching the offensive line. So I don't know for sure, but I do know this, that after injuries occurred along the offensive line, that line came together and performed quite well right into the playoffs. Struggled, because it wasn't a great offensive line to begin with. Struggled against the better teams, but still were able to get to the national championship game. So, will the possibility ever exist that former Notre Dame offensive guard Chris Watt is the offensive line coach at Notre Dame? I'm not sure about that. He's currently with the Indianapolis Colts, still with the Indianapolis Colts. A Harry Heastan disciple, so to speak. I'm not sure if that will play at Notre Dame at any point. But as of now, Tim, I mean, John, you just said it essentially. We pretty much expect Joe Rudolph to remain the offensive line coach.
Well, also with discord in the room, I mean, why? Because someone says there is? What are
That's
we
what
doing here? What are we
no,
doing? I mean, yeah, who could? I
well,
mean,
because
here's what Joe
we're
Rudolph
being
did.
asked
Here's what
about.
Joe Rudolph did for Irish Illustrated this season. 7 people on Irish Illustrated. What position group are you most skeptical about, and what has to improve the most? Tim Priester, offensive line. John Bryce, offensive line. Drew Mentok, offensive line. Eric Thomas, offensive line. Tom the intern, offensive line. Tim O'Malley, offensive line. How did the offensive line do? Joe Rudolph did a great job.
He did.
If people are mad at him, let them be mad. If parents are mad, let them be mad. This is big boy football, and they all get paid to get yelled at too. I can't stand. There's discord in the offensive line room. Okay, great. All right, let's keep everybody happy.
Well, Marcus Freeman himself would tell you and has told us in press conferences, I hope guys are mad if they're
Oh
not
my
starting.
gosh,
We
is
don't have the
insane.
right kind of guys if they're not mad for not starting.
Yes, he replaced a bunch of starters and then replaced another one again. Like,
And I think to your point, T.O., you were very raw at the onset of this podcast in discussing how hard it is to evaluate whether a guy will be a good defensive coordinator or not. I think offensive line might be the most difficult position coach for me to grasp and see. And I've been impressed when I've watched Rudolph. I've tried to pay particular attention to Rudolph, but I will always default to the people that do it for a living and know more than me. And I will point blank tell you, I had guys that I know that I didn't know Joe Rudolph or know how much they paid attention approach me at AFCA in Charlotte and say, man, I can't believe Joe Rudolph wasn't on your coach of the year list at Football Scoop for offensive line coaches. And he wasn't on the list. And that's obviously beyond my purview. We have some ability to nominate, but it also is the peers around the country. But these are guys that unprompted, unsolicited, said that guy did a hell of a job. I'm surprised he wasn't on your list. And, again, coaches around the country know that I don't obscure the fact I live in South Bend. So sometimes they'll call me Mr. South Bend, or they're like, hey, Notre Dame, why is this happening? What's going on here, or whatever. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not Notre Dame. I'm not Notre Dame. Now I'm married to somebody that's Notre Dame, but I am not Notre Dame. So anyway, I wanted to make that point because I will never pretend to have the technical expertise to know a guy is a great offensive line coach or not. I know that Joe Rudolph's reputation is that of a very good offensive line coach, and the guys sought me out as we were talking. And some of these guys were award winners for Football Scoop at other positions or other levels of football, FCS winners and things like that. And they thought he had done a really good job.
How many people had semifinalist Joe Moore Award for Notre Dame and Joe Rudolph going into this year when they had Anthony Knapp starting at left tackle, who was the third string center in the spring when we left off and we were trying to do our ratings? I know he moved away from that earlier than we knew, but I mean, it's incredible that and they deserve the semifinals. They weren't the best offensive line in the country. They deserve the semifinalist nod, though.
He literally developed an offensive line that was 9 or 10 deep, which you never say.
Right.
They went to the playoffs with a reconfigured offensive line midway through, or not earlier than that, with the loss of Ashton Craig. They had to make a decision about Sam Pendleton. Sam Pendleton read the writing on the wall. Nor the two best guards in the program now are Billy Schrouth and Charles Jagusa, if they choose to move him there. So I just wanted to, I'm glad I was able to get you riled up there, Tim.
I don't understand it. Like Discord of the line. Okay, well, he did a great job. So there's okay. Let's find everything Marcus Freeman does to make people mad. Be a lot of guys that aren't happy Marcus Freeman had to cut him. I mean, oh my gosh, this person's parents very upset that Marcus Freeman cut him. I would be too.
and that's why I say we're not the people to ask about this. I brought it up so that we could posit some type of opinion on it, but
I hope some people are so mad again after 16 games that Joe Rudolph coaches next year that they just got to complain about it and can't believe they have to transfer. All right, I am all that is man. What sophomore do you think has the best chance to make an impact next year that did not this year?
I have 3 in the top group, unless Logan Thomas, who made an impact this year, but you might not include him. I think his role is going to expand next year. But I would have a top 3 of CJ Carr, Gerby Lambert, and Micah Gilbert. Did I miss somebody?
Those are really good ones.
I would have an incredibly tough time disagreeing with that. I told someone earlier this week, might have been on a radio appearance. I don't even remember. I'm tired of talking. Kedron Young, I'm excited. I'm really excited, and I expect Kedron Young to get as much or more work than anyone in that aforementioned spring camp, which we're not allowed apparently to say when it is, but it's
always in March and April. We can definitely say that it's always in March and April.
Probably be an earlier than later spring game, but anyway.
Kedron Young was my one to add because I think he can be an excellent running back. Running back room's going to be interesting in the spring.
There, but
yeah, you know what happens when those things get crowded? They tend to find some discord and somebody goes somewhere and then the world goes on.
Well, Dylan McCullough has experience playing 4 to 5 guys. It ebbs and flows throughout the course of a season, but
yep. Oh yeah. He has 6 in the spring room. That's a lot for the spring, including early enrollee. It's hard to go beyond those names. Those are great.
I mean, Sean Sevillano, they need size on the interior. He's got to get in great shape, get off blocks, and be a barrier there. They need him. Other guys, and I like, there's going to be a follow-up. What about Cam Williams? There's no indication that Cam Williams is ready to break through. So, will he ever? Will it take longer?
I got an important one for you because they need a third corner. Carson Hobbs is important.
I have him on the list too. Yeah. They do need him because those 2 corners were getting all the snaps in the postseason.
Now they have freshmen coming in, but Carson Hobbs would be great timing for that. That would be a big one.
Yeah.
And I would say, he had the late season shoulder injury, but we just kept hearing about him unprompted. KK Smith.
He'd be a redshirt sophomore, but point taken.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Tay Johnson, Logan Saldate. Every time Mike Denbrock was asked about, young guys that could step forward. He mentioned him. You mentioned Carson Hobbs, which I agree. Did I say Tay Johnson?
You did.
Yeah. Maybe I'm missing somebody else, but I think those would be the one. Actually, I think the top two is Carr and Lambert, and then Gilbert is a 2A. But they've lost receivers and they need somebody to replace them in addition to Will Pauling and Malachi Fields doing it. And I think Micah Gilbert, he had that unfortunate drop, that easy touchdown pass drop.
Did he have another two from Angeli? Was that him as well, or was that KK Smith?
I think
Angeli threw a dime on the sideline. Beautiful pass.
I think that was KK Smith.
That'd have been KK Smith. Yeah.
The one that Gilbert was, that was an automatic 6. And I was surprised because we know how, it can happen to anybody, but we know how the Notre Dame coaching staff felt about Micah Gilbert. And I figured given that opportunity, he would have caught it, but he didn't. But I know they like him a lot. We have a question from Irish B. True or false? Next year's team will be more talented than the 2024 team was.
I'd push back against this because of developed talent's all that matters. There are some positions, though, you really like it. But Watts, Kaiser, Mills, Cross, Morrison, Leonard that's a high top of my list. That's a high top range for me. I think the freshmen in the 2025 and 2024 classes really look good, if you want to say it that way. If you're saying like 1 through what is it, 1 through 96 right now? Maybe it is 1 through 96, but boy, that top 10 was proven commodities coming into the season.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, John. I asked a question. My apologies.
No, I would say it's hard for me to sit here and say that it's definitively going to be overall more talented. I think there will be more visible talent in some very key spots. As long as Boubacar gets back really fully healthy, I think they will definitely be a more talented edge presence team in 25 than they were this year. If you get Love back fully healthy and ready to roll, he's already getting Heisman Trophy odds set on him by third-party people that do that for a living. I think that's pretty indicative. And then I think we've all just said we're excited to see more Kedron Young this spring. So I think you can potentially have a collective backfield more talented. I think CJ Carr is a more talented passer than Riley Leonard for sure, and a more accurate passer than Riley Leonard. And I think the sum of the parts at wide receiver will be more talented next year. You can't say that at tight end. I still think Notre Dame will be very good. I think Eli Raridan is poised for that breakout role. I'm very encouraged by what he did over the balance of the season, how much more physically he played, and also the fact that he stayed healthy, and him telling me in Atlanta how awesome it was to stay healthy, how much he credited Lauren Lando for keeping him healthy in the most grueling and longest football season of his life. He's not stayed healthy consistently, and he stayed healthy in the longest season in Notre Dame history. So I like all of that. I think even without Ben Morrison and Xavier Watts, you bring in Devontae Smith. I think I mentioned this earlier in the week, the coaches around the country who rave about 8, as in Adon Schuler being the most talented guy, the guy they feared the most in the Notre Dame back end as the season wore on. I think you have a chance to have a equal, potentially slightly more talented secondary in 2025. So they're very comparable, but there are spots that I think the enhanced talent that I expect Notre Dame to have in 25 will be more visible, if that makes sense. And maybe it doesn't.
On paper, if you accolades and what your impression would be if you said you're going to have a starting offensive line of Lambert, Schrouth, Craig, Jogusaw, and Wagner. On paper, that's an incredible front 5 out there with some young guys coming up. Defense, I think defensive end, when you look at like just pass rushers, Traore, Logan Thomas, Bryce Young, Junior Tuialamaka, there's a great deal of potential there. Now, and I didn't mention Botello. will Botello be where he needs to be physically, Traore, those kind of things. But if it falls into place, man, that's a pretty good looking core of pass rushers. You lose Jack Kaiser, linebacker, but all those other guys will be better for the experience that they've gone through. Drake Bowen is really trending up. Needless to say, Viliamu Asa is trending up. Osbury had kind of a tough end of the season, but had a really good year overall. Jalen Sneed still with the program. Hope he stays with it. Mad Farimo comes in.
Right.
That's I mean, that's a pretty good group. And John, you're right. I mean, Devontae Smith, I think, is a huge addition to that back group. And Tim, you're right. They need Carson Hobbs to step forward where they can comfortably rotate him in there at cornerback.
Next question from Jay Jude. Question for John Bryce. This has come up elsewhere, but in your initial report for the DC search in 2022, you listed Ash as a candidate. I don't remember Ash as a serious candidate whatsoever. Was he actually a serious candidate on the last go round?
I appreciate whoever looked that up, because it took them looking it up and asking me for me to look up and remember it. And so then I did some digging. And I believe in talking with people that Ash had more interest in Notre Dame the first time around than Notre Dame had interest in Ash. Notre Dame's top target from the outset was Jim Leonhard, and Marcus Freeman let it be known almost immediately upon getting the job that he was going to do everything in his power in December of 21 to try and convince Jim Leonhard to come be Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. He couldn't make it happen. He quickly pivoted to Al Golden, and they began to talk for well over a month, and that's why you saw people asking what's taking so long to hire a defensive coordinator. And if you knew that he was waiting on the Bengals run to end, and then that he would hire Al Golden. He talked to other people along the way. Ash was a name that was given to me by somebody on campus at the time, and then also a name that I verified with some agents. And yes, Chris Ash, again, at that point in time, was indicated to me, had more interest on the front end than what Notre Dame initially did, but he did have interest in the job back then. But that was always a two-man race, and then everyone else. And Marcus Freeman talked to a number of guys in that search process. I'm trying to remember, there were a couple of others, maybe Tony Gibson at NC State at the time was another guy that he spoke with. But it was very much Jim Leonhard, just like this one. This search started out very Jim Leonhard centric, the same way that, frankly, my folks in Columbus told me that their search to replace Jim Knowles started out very, very Jim Leonhard centric. So that guy's sitting in the catbird seat. I don't know if there will be a defensive coordinator job that lures him back to college, or if his next step will be an NFL defensive coordinator.
Yeah, for me, all things being equal, Jim Leonhard would have been the guy that I would have chosen with my slight little bit of knowledge compared to everybody that's making these decisions. But I think Notre Dame should probably cut off conversations with Jim Leonhard about coming there now, because I mean that's 0 for 2, and that gets a little frustrating when you get your hopes up a little bad. I don't know if Notre Dame got their hopes up, but they did this time around. Certainly, he was their number one choice.
Have you gotten a yes on every date request, TP? Because if so, I can't relate to that. I got to keep asking.
No, I realize that, but I think in a search like this, 2 strikes might be the equivalent of 3.
They give you 3.
Tim, you want to respond to
that? No, he's never.
If Ash was a serious candidate. No, I think we got that one covered.
Okay,
pretty well.
Yes. We got a question from Bobby1556. What are your expectations for some of the guys on the defensive line that didn't do much this year? Brennan Vernon, Armel Mukam. Vernon seems like a strange case, was a big recruit in that class and hasn't broke through yet.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, go ahead, T.O.
I was going to say, bluntly, my expectations are low, but I'm happy to be proven wrong.
I would say spring and offseason represent an inflection point for Vernon. I think that this is a juncture moment in his Notre Dame career, and if it's going to be a Notre Dame career. And then beyond that, Mukam was a project all along. We heard and witnessed encouraging things from him in August as camp unfolded prior to the 24 season. That did not ultimately really translate into him being a factor. But there's opportunity there, and he's still got a little bit more under his belt than a Sean Sevillano. They're different type players, but they're both on the interior. Those guys, people are going to get tired of me harping on it, but that's the next step for Notre Dame. They have to have much better depth there, not just in keeping players healthy, but in quality of player on the defensive interior, the same as they've got to have a multi-year starting quarterback moving forward.
I think there's much greater reason to believe that Mookum is about to make a move than Vernon, simply based upon the fact that when coaches bring names up unsolicited, that makes an impact. I don't remember that happening with Brennan Vernon. I do remember
Nope.
that happening with Armel Mookum.
Yep, he
Or at
did.
least asking about Mookum and then getting a real favorable, praiseworthy evaluation of him.
We saw Mookum have some moments in the
It's a great, that's a
in the
great
summer
body,
camp.
man. That's a great body in the middle of that defensive line.
It is. We probably jumped on it too soon, and that's what this next year is for. The first time we saw Jason Onye, he didn't do a single thing. When we saw Jason Onye flash, it took 2 years. So Mookum could do it. Sevillano is not listed here, but I have much higher hopes for Sevillano going into the year. I mean, Mookum didn't play a snap in the playoffs or against USC.
Yeah.
He was on varsity, though, where Houston, Vernon were not. So I would say Mookum is ahead of Vernon. I had Vernon much higher than Mookum in their respective recruiting classes, but I am able to let go of my original recruiting analysis after several years, cycle through Notre Dame players, and I think people should be able to do that. It's a quality that they need.
Yeah, it may take, Sevillano may not be ready till 2026, but I think when you look at the potential of Gabe Rubio, I mean, just the ability, the size, the quickness, the mobility. I think there's a potentially really good defensive tackle there. I like Jared Dawson a lot coming in from Louisville. Elijah Hughes is raw, but there's a lot of raw potential there. Again, I don't want to build up hopes, but since we know that there's the possibility that Onye could come back, he certainly flashed at times on the practice field.
I mean, he flashed in September.
He flashed in
So, yeah.
September. You're absolutely right, Tim. Heinisch, they've got to get bigger though, and see that's where Mookum he was listed at 302 this past season. Will probably be in the 305, 310 range. Sevillano, it's about being smaller than 330. If he could get to I think if he could get to a 315 range, his stamina would be a lot better. I like Cole Mullins. He's undersized, but I think there's a real tenacious, really tough football player there. So there's some hope, but we just haven't heard a lot about Brennan Vernon, and I loved him. I loved him coming out of high school, but I'm not, contrary to some other places, I'm not just going to hold on to this hope without actually seeing it and saying, oh, he's going to be great, because I thought that 3 years ago. You got to show it. You got to develop it.
Next from Mac 341, over the last month of the season, what changed in Jaden Greathouse or in the offense to make him the number one target for Leonard?
I think it, well, first and foremost, it comes down to this. Leonard threw it to Greathouse and he caught it. Then he threw it to him again and he caught it. Then he threw it to him again and again and again and he caught it. He was targeted 15 times in the last 2 games and he caught 13 of them. Now, did Greathouse suddenly get open better? Did it have something to do with the defense? I'm not sure that I can pass that judgment, but I think any
He got
quarterback
open better on one play. I know that.
yeah, he was way open on that one. Look, I mean the pitch catch operation of a quarterback and a wide receiver. If a quarterback throws to a guy and he catches it, and you throw it to him again and he catches it, rinse and repeat and do it again. And they had a lot of success doing it. 226 yards in 2 games, I believe it was.
Yeah, I think it boiled down to mutual confidence in one another. One made a play that gave the other one confidence. The other one got a ball that gave the other one confidence. And I think that's what it was. And once that happened, it bloomed from there. And I think every one of us has said, going back to when Notre Dame signed Jaden Greathouse, that among pure football players, he is as pure of a football player on that roster. He is very technically sound. He was a very advanced player when he arrived at Notre Dame. He played in one of the greatest prep programs in the country. He had had incredible high school coaching and then additional training on top of that. He came in more college ready than most guys. We saw flashes of it. Now he's closed this season with it. And I don't think there's any question, even with Malachi Fields, that he's the undisputed top receiver in my mind for Notre Dame going into the 25 season. And also, I've noted before, I'll note again, it's my understanding Malachi Fields is having a surgical procedure this spring and obviously does not get to South Bend until summer. So he's a very accomplished receiver, but he has to stay healthy. So
There was one more instance why Greathouse, I think, and Leonard started connecting more. They couldn't run against Penn State or Ohio State. They
That's
couldn't
very
run the
true.
ball.
Yeah.
Those are his two big games. They absolutely could not run the ball. They didn't run the ball well in the final 56 minutes against Indiana either, and they had to throw to Jordan Faison. I think that was necessity was the mother of invention there. And I know we said that we don't hold on to our recruiting rankings, but damn it, I'm holding on to the one for Jaden Greathouse because I knew he was going to be good.
Well,
Have
that's
to say it.
that's a different story because he's certainly shown a lot of promise. And
I really could not believe he didn't break out until then, which why you know what? He broke out the exact right time. That's fine if you don't have a great game against Purdue and Georgia Tech and Stanford, Jaden. That was a good time to play your best football. And man, he was outstanding.
no doubt about it. We have a question from Denver Maximus. It's a little long. Bear with me. This year, the DNA of the offense was based off running the running ability of Riley Leonard. It is obvious the offense needs more big strike and big play capability to win it all. Do you see Mike Denbrock running a similar style of offense next year with Minchie/Angeli or Carr, or a more aggressive passing game to complement the running game? Does Notre Dame have the players for this kind of offense?
Go ahead, JB.
I was just about to cede the floor to you.
All right, I can throw it out there then. I think he'll tweak his offense because the Jaden Daniels, Riley Leonard offense is just different than what they have now. Every good offensive coordinator tweaks it, and every very good or great offensive coordinator tweaks it. Really interesting thread on the message board, so I went down a little wormhole. Riley Leonard and Jaden Daniels play action rate, according to Pro Football Focus, and it's play action rate is pretty easy to track. I think that's one thing we can track. 16.9% for both of them. Other quarterbacks in the college football playoff, 40%, 35%, 33%, 38%, 37%. You're going to have to use more play action. If you're Mike Denbrock in this one, I did go back to Desmond Ridder, who could also run, but Desmond Ridder was 25%. So there could be a reluctance that may have to be changed a little bit. I think you could say there's a reluctance if the two running quarterbacks, and they were very successful, by the way. Jaden Daniels, 8 touchdowns, 0 picks in play action. Riley Leonard, 7-1. It's not like it didn't work out for him. So I found that really interesting in the thread. Rarely do those things bear out when someone says they don't run play action enough. They might not run play action enough.
I think that I've made the statement before, in my opinion. The really good coaches are the ones who tailor their schemes to fit their personnel and not force their personnel to fit their predetermined schemes. And I think Mike Denbrock has absolutely proved that he can be somewhat of a chameleon with his schemes and will adapt to the personnel that he has. And we should not forget the fact that Jaden Daniels was throwing to a couple of first rounders at LSU, Brian Thomas and the other guy who was drafted even higher.
Malik Neighbors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Won't you be my neighbors? And so he had those two guys, and Riley Leonard, quite frankly, did not. And Des Ridder had a couple of nice weapons at Cincinnati, but nothing the ilk of those guys. So I think also you're going to have hopefully a fully healthy Jeremiah Love, but also he was so explosive this year, he'll be a much greater focal point of the opposition in 25, which stands to figure that it should open up even more in the throw game. So that's kind of my expectation. I think Mike Denbrock would absolutely like to attack downfield more, and I think Mike Denbrock would like to be a much more consistent, effective offense in the throw game.
I think when you have a running quarterback like Daniels and Leonard, your read option game is essentially your play action game. I would agree, Tim. I mean, those numbers, I don't. It doesn't seem to me that play action is that difficult to do, but it freezes the linebackers. But so does, I mean, read option does
Yes,
to a
it
large
does.
extent too. So I mean, I think that that's kind of the substitute for it.
Other teams run read option nowadays though too, but not they
Yeah,
don't run as well as Daniels and Leonard. But I mean,
no,
Dylan Gabriel runs plenty of it, and
no,
there's
but the style of your quarterback and Angeli can. We saw it in the Sun Bowl. Angeli can read that option, can run the read and keep it and burst for 7 yards. We saw him against Purdue. Purdue's not exactly a good measuring stick, but he's quick and decisive when he decides to keep it. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I just wanted to add, whenever you were done, I just wanted to
Oh,
add
okay.
that I think as it pertains to all of that, also on play action for this past year, how many times did Notre Dame just form this beautiful clean pocket that Riley Leonard and Notre Dame's offense could consistently run a play action and feel like he wasn't going to face an onslaught of rushers by the time he finished the play fake and turned around to face the defense. So I think that's one element to keep in mind. And then to your point about Angeli, I would just say also CJ Carr is not Jack Cohn or Curtis Rourke, the Indiana starting quarterback in the playoff this year. Like, he is not a complete statue back there. He's not going to confuse anybody as Riley Leonard, but I think CJ Carr is a much more adequate athlete than perhaps people note on first glance.
I totally agree, and I think people will see that in short order. One thing we know for sure: Notre Dame's quarterback this year is not going to lead the team in rushing attempts with 184, which is what Riley Leonard did with really heavy doses in the playoffs. So you have to run a little bit more. You have to run a little bit more play action, I think, to compensate for what you lose in that department. But I agree, John. We just haven't had an opportunity to see a lot of CJ Carr running the football. Well, how would we? Where would we have seen that? But I think he's going to be perfectly capable of doing that. But
I wish he would have run out of the pocket on one particular scout team rep.
he may have been pinned there. I'm not sure that he had much of a opportunity to get out of that one. We have a question from or is that one? I told Althea, do you see heavier rotations in 2025 with the goal to play 16 games coming off a 16-game season? Feels like keeping O-line, D-line, running backs fresh by rotating more and taking starters out earlier with leads could be beneficial to another hopefully long season. Notre Dame rotated about as much this year as we've ever seen a Notre Dame team rotate.
I mean, no coach. It's very weird, and it all boils down to sort of the intrinsic chemistry that an offensive line develops over the course of the season, and how much they know intuitively what the man next to him on their left or right is going to do. There's just not a lot of offensive line rotation anywhere in the country.
Never, never.
There was one team I was struck, maybe even in the playoffs, that did some offensive line rotation that I took note of, and I'll try to have some more information on that maybe one day next week because I had it brought up to me. Beyond that, talk to the guys that play for Dylan McCullough. They absolutely freaking love the fact that they're rotated and that they're not getting the tread worn off their tires at Notre Dame. So I think they've already been very smart about that. I just alluded to it already that Eli Raridan praised this staff for load management over the course of this season to not only keep him healthy, but for being smart about it. And Marcus Freeman himself said he leaned into starting this playoff run with not only a guy like Lauren Lando, but Dylan McCullough also, who had been in the NFL, and a couple other guys, Max Bulla, who had been in the NFL, who played a 16-game plus season, or in Dylan's case, had coached in a 19-game season as the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. So I think that, and defensive line rotation, Notre Dame absolutely wants to rotate the hell out of its defensive line. It has to have healthy, better defensive linemen to do that. They rotated as much as they could this year. They will rotate more. And frankly, that gives me a segue into pointing out defensive line rotation. If you drill down to what happened in Columbus and why Jim Knowles left, at the very epicenter of a lot of it is the Mexican standoff between Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson over defensive line rotation that bubbled the whole damn season. And finally, Jim Knowles won a national title, got paid as the highest defensive coordinator in college football. Pennsylvania is his home, and he absolutely didn't even say bye on the way out the door.
Was there Discord at all in the Ohio State rooms
There,
when they were?
there
There were
was.
in the
Discord?
defensive coordinator, defensive line meeting room. How about that?
Man, what are we gonna do about this Discord? It's gonna
Yeah,
I'm
be
going to
Larry
launch a
Jo-
Discord.
two
I'm going
best
to
two
launch
best
a
teams in the
Dis-
country just blowing up, ripping apart the seams in the offensive line and defensive line rooms.
I'm going to launch a Discord channel for you, Tim O'Malley.
I will not subscribe.
Larry Johnson definitely liked to tap into his depth there, and that But man, when you got a starting defensive front four like that, I could understand why Jim Knowles might get a little upset sometimes. I wanted to say this in a previous mention of Eli Raridan. Eli Raridan can absolutely be a number one receiving tight end, but he has to improve his get off. That was something that we heard during the course of the season. He's got to be quicker, stronger, faster off the snap of the football. He's got everything else. He has the tools to be a lead wide receiver. The rotation of offensive line, I tend to bristle at a lot of questions, but I bristle at questions that aren't reality. Maybe there's one team out of 134 that rotates offensive linemen, or Harry Hiestand rotated with Hainsey, one guy, but teams don't do that. There's too much chemistry involved for it. So to have expectations of rotating offensive linemen when nobody in the game does that is unrealistic. Other positions, yeah, Learning rotated at linebacker. They were rotating at in the secondary until they were too threadbare at corner to do something to do something else.
I mean, they rotate a lot. They had
They
15
rotate a
important
lot.
players. They had 15 important players injured, so they couldn't rotate as
Yeah,
deep as they would
right.
like.
Exactly. They rotated a ton. That was
And one guy
their
quit too. They would have liked to have rotated a corner in, but he quit, so they couldn't rotate him in.
I understand totally the question because
Yeah.
it makes all the sense in the world. And the coach or coaching staff that can ever figure out how to effectively rotate even two members of an offensive line over the course of a game and figure out some sort of rhythm to it will be so much better off because it's the only position on the field other than quarterback, and there's still a handful of programs out there that do utilize two quarterbacks.
Yeah.
It's the only position where there's zero rotation whatsoever. And it's the toughest position because you have an assignment and you know guys are going to get to run full bore at you every snap, and you have assignments that keep you from just trying to go man in the ring with them.
question from AC_Irish. Watching Malachi Fields tape is exciting. He looks like the type of guy the Irish haven't had since Chase Claypool. Based on your assessment, is it crazy to project him as the second best player on offense next year besides Jeremiah Love? John, can you tell us a little bit more about what that surgery entails?
Yeah, I just know that he's supposed to have a surgery over the course of the spring, or maybe he's happened to already have it. I'm not sure. Information I picked up when I was around some ACC coaches in Charlotte. I feel like I can answer that question with some pretty good depth of knowledge there because I talked with some people that had played against him that had been on the field with him on more than one occasion, and they said if the guy plays like he did the first half of the 2024 season for Virginia, he's an absolute NFL receiver. If he plays like he did the second half, where he maybe wasn't as interested or didn't seem as effective and quite possibly also was not as healthy, then he's a completely different player. There's a lot of excitement there. I expect him to be a big-bodied receiver who quickly works himself into shape with Notre Dame, who's played a lot of football. So the learning curve at Notre Dame should be quicker because of that. It was put to me that Virginia very much would have liked to keep him, and he was a Charlottesville kid that just felt like to take the next step in his career, he had to get a change of scenery. So he does, though. I don't want to specify the surgery just because I don't have the liberty to do so. It's not a knee. I'll say that. It's not a ligament surgery in either knee or anything like that. So I can feel comfortable saying that. And it's not a surgery that will necessarily have an incredibly long rehab process, but it will be a recovery process after the surgery that I'll have to get better from.
Hey, Tim, he probably Malachi Fields might have got a little disinterested in the second half of the season because he had Anthony Calandria throwing him in football.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that'll do it. By the way, this question's I was thinking when I looked up some of the tangential stats for Claypool and Fields, it was going to ruin the question, but this is spot on. Like Contested catches for Chase Claypool. This is his best year, okay? He had 26 chances at a contested catch. He caught 15. Malachi Fields had 25 catches. He caught 13.
Whoa.
Average depth or average yards after the catch. Malachi Fields 5.1. Chase Claypool 5.4. Average depth of target. Chase Claypool 13. Malachi Fields 12. They're really close in a lot of these things where you want to kind of you look at what a receiver does compared to just the raw numbers of how many times he caught a ball. Missed tackles forced, Chase Claypool 14, Malachi Fields 13. Like,
Wow.
first downs, this is the big difference, but you know why? Because as you said, Calandria versus Ian Book, it was 51-34. But one guy was much better football team, 2019 Irish versus the Virginia team.
I don't I don't think it's far-fetched to think that. I mean, I don't know why we would think it would be far-fetched for Malachi Fields to be the second best player on
Claypool was just awesome, so I
offense.
didn't want that. But man,
Yeah.
those numbers
No,
are
that's
close.
great. It's great to
Yeah.
hear that. Now, I would argue that somebody like a Billy Strouth or Charles Jagus could argue. It's more. I would imagine that this
CJ Carr. I just made everybody
comment
happy.
is
CJ
more,
Carr.
yeah, more skill position kind of deal. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we should be. Malachi Fields has 129 career receptions with another year to go. He's had a heck of a college career. But you know, Strouth, Jagus, I think those are
Yeah. Those are
those
fair
are potential number two best offensive players.
Yeah, one little nugget I'll drop here in talking with some people around the country the last week and a half. Strouth is already very much starting to get some preseason 2025 All-America chatter about him. And when we
I'm
ask a
excited to see
question,
him truly healthy because you know he fought back and
right.
probably wouldn't have played against Georgia Tech if that was this is a dumb thing to say. If that was a bye week, he wouldn't have played. But you know he probably wasn't fully healthy yet when he came back against Georgia
Oh,
Tech, and then you
he
got
limped for a few games.
yeah, then you
Yeah,
got
Yeah,
to
he
fight
did.
through it. So I'm excited to see
Yeah.
him play.
Tom, the intern, tweeted out on the Irish Illustrated account, Billy Strouth after the USC game where he'd just given a Warriors effort, his limp just to go sing the alma mater and how heavily his ankle was taped. I mean, it was very admirable to witness that. And the final thing I would say on this question would be when you talk about could he be the second best player on offense behind Love next year? How much time did all three of us spend extolling the virtues of one Jaden Greathouse today? So let's not forget
Oh
that.
yeah.
yeah, I like dropped him completely from my mind for some
Oh,
reason for the first time ever. Yeah,
oh no, I had him in mind, but I was just
I
responding to the
completely
Malachi
forgot. That's
Fields.
pretty funny.
Yeah. Hey, let's wrap it up here. And this just broke. I really don't know much about it, so I'm going to throw it out there. But ND Fan 08 asks, what do you guys think about Ross Dellinger's report that the new ACC ESPN extension is expected to include Notre Dame playing two of Florida State, Miami, and Clemson each season? Is this a
This
good thing or bad thing pertaining to Notre Dame making the playoff each year?
I think it's overall a good thing. I don't think it's closer to happening now. It's not a new concept. This is something that's been being discussed all the way, definitely back into 24, if not as early as 23. It's part of the ACC's plan to try and boost its own conference profile by leaning more into Notre Dame and having it face more of its quote unquote top half teams. It's also, let's not ignore the fact that it's revenue driven. There's a reason that anytime the ACC can dictate what time slot Notre Dame's going to play in, it tries to put the Irish in a prime television slot. So there are layers to this, but it's not an entirely new concept whatsoever. It's something that's been being discussed easily for 18 months, maybe closer to 24 to 30 months. They do want Notre Dame playing those top tier teams much more often. Those other teams believe it can help their strength of schedule. It obviously would have given Notre Dame the potential for a little more leeway after Notre Dame starts this past season 1-1, sitting there with a loss to Northern Illinois and not having Miami and Clemson on the schedule this year. So when you look at that, I guarantee you Marcus Freeman and company would view it as an opportunity possibility for this football program.
I have two thoughts on it. Number one is conferences are stupid and people should be independent because it's easily the best way of managing a football program and a football team. I'd like to point that out. And I, for one, will miss the likes of Braxton Burmeister and Anthony Calandria and Emmett Moorhead at quarterback if they stop playing Virginia, Virginia Tech, and BC and start playing more of the Miami, Florida State, Clemson. But no, they have to do it. they got fortunate this year that they were so good, because had they blown that Northern Illinois game and lost another one, they would not have made the playoffs, even close to making the playoffs this year. That schedule is weird, but you got to play. You got to play some of the better teams. And look, 9-4 Florida State, whether they're good or not, gets more hype about them than 9-4 Virginia does. It carries more weight. There's people in that room. You try to tell me they have a system of picking the playoffs. Well, number 1 was Oregon. Number 4 was Penn State. They're going to rematch that game. That's if there was a 14 playoff, that was the system. It was absolutely perfect. You were going to rematch Texas and Georgia and Oregon and Penn State in your 1, 2, 3, 4. I absolutely guarantee you the people in that room would have moved Penn State off of that line and put Notre Dame on that line.
We're going to wrap up here, but I just want to remind people Notre Dame's upcoming schedule. And there was all this talk about Notre Dame's schedule in 2024. It wasn't very good. Well, let's take a look at this. At Miami, then an off week, Texas A&M at home, Purdue, at Arkansas. Notre Dame's never played there. Then Boise State at home, then NC State, upper echelon ACC, then USC, rival, off week, at Boston College, Navy, at Pittsburgh, upper echelon, generally speaking, ACC team, Syracuse at home, upper echelon ACC team, and then finishing at Stanford and or perhaps south of that. So I don't think people are going to be talking about Notre Dame's schedule the way they were this past year. And if you start adding 2 of Florida State, Miami, and Clemson every year, they won't be doing that as well. Guys, last thoughts.
September's tough.
Yeah,
September is tough.
It's a tough schedule. I really think the first 7, when I look at it a little more closely, to me, there's a clear line of demarcation between the first 7 and the last 5. Now,
7 is at Boston College. Is that right?
Maybe so. I can't remember.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So
No, I'm sorry.
6.
7 through
first 6. Then yes.
7 through USC. Yeah.
7 is through USC, and then that's an improved Boston College team, and it's a Pitt team that will be playing for its life with Pat Narduzzi on one of the hottest hot seats in the country when Notre Dame goes there, or maybe it's a Pitt team that's more established in Cade Bell's offense and doing some funky stuff and not losing the final 6 games of their season and fading into complete oblivion. We'll see. Or as Mike Tyson once famously said, fading into Bolivian, where he could just go and fly his pigeons on the roof.
All right, we're going to wrap up there, but I do want to and we'll be back again with Irish Illustrated Insider as the calendar turns to February. We'll be back on Monday, but tomorrow we're going to start. Tim O'Malley and I are kicking around a bunch of ideas, a new podcast that we're calling Irish Illustrated ISO. It will either be myself or Tim focusing on one topic, elaborating upon it. Won't be nearly as long as what you're accustomed to with Irish Illustrated Insider, but it's something that
I'm going to go for 3 hours, just start talking to the world.
Nah, we're not. Well, you can do that. I'm incapable of doing that, but we're going to give it a shot, and I'm going to do the first one tomorrow. So keep an eye out for Irish Illustrated ISO as we introduce another opportunity to babble on and on, which I tend to do. Until then, Tim Priester, Tim O'Malley, John Bryce, thank you for joining us today for Irish Illustrated Insider.